next up we have Dr. Matteo Sottocornola, apologies if I have said that wrong, from the School of Science and Computing also, and he is looking at ecosystems, functioning and productivity. Thank you, Matteo.
Thank you. Good morning. Yeah, my name is Matteo, and I am a lecturer in the Department of Science. And my research focuses really on increasing the understanding of ecosystem functioning and ecosystem productivity. I do this by studying a number of ecosystem processes like carbon and water fluxes and energy flows in different types of ecosystems. The aim is to increase our understanding on the impacts of climate and management changes. I study these impacts in a number of different ecosystem services, and the overall aim is to increase the environmental sustainability of our land management. So in terms of fluxes at an ecosystem level, what we usually use is this technique, this Eddy Covariance technique, which consists of the Eddy Covariance system consists of two different types of sensors. We have here on the left a three-dimensional sonic anemometer that measures the wind speed in the three directions. And then on the right-hand side, we have a gas analyzer that measures concentration of gases like water vapor, methane, carbon dioxide, or others. And what this system does, it samples the turbulent motion of air between the biosphere and the atmosphere. And we are interested in turbulence because it's responsible of most of the air motion in the vertical direction. There's for crossing the interface between the biosphere and the atmosphere that we are interested to focus on. So in terms of carbon dioxide, the important thing to note is that what we measure is actually the net flux. What is we call the net ecosystem CO2 exchange, which is composed of two different processes. GPP, gross primary production, which basically is photosynthesis, and then the respiration due to plant respiration or decomposition, for example. And we can disentangle these two processes using simple models. And we can also, there are techniques to calculate also net primary production, which is basically plant growth. So these are Eddy Covariance systems mounted on towers on two different types of ecosystems, a grassland here and over a forest there. And what we get from these measurements are time series like this one. This is over a 5 years period, where every single dot represents the CO2 flux averaged over a half an hour. By definition, by convention, negative flux means an uptick by the ecosystem. We can also present this time series as a cumulative sum. Here there is a number of years, every year with a different color. And again, plotted as a time series. Yeah, well, it's a cumulative sum, suppose. So interesting here is that by the end of this curve, the end of the year, what this graph is telling us is the CO2 balance over the year for the different years for a particular ecosystem. And then we can start appreciating the variability of these curves and therefore of the CO2 fluxes within an ecosystem, both within a single year or between different years. If we combine this information with information on environmental and meteorological parameters that we also measure at these sites, like radiation, temperature, precipitation, soil water content, we can start analyzing and understanding what are the main drivers, meteorological and environmental drivers that explain the variability of these CO2 fluxes. Another thing we are interested in is also answering a different question. Okay, but we know, when we were measuring how much carbon dioxide is, or carbon in general, is absorbed by ecosystem. And the following question is, but where does this carbon go? And this has a strong implication both for climate mitigation, because the residence time of this carbon, if it goes into a leaf is much shorter than if it goes into the roots of the plants, for example. And also thinking about croplands or forest, where this carbon is invested has a huge impact on the yield of the crop of interest. Once we have a good database of measured data, what we can do is then model this, which means to replicate the measured data using different types of models. This is therefore a few graphs on a simple enough light use efficiency model that replicates gross primary production. Once we calibrate it and we're happy with how the model is replicating the measured data, what we can do is start playing with the input parameters, applying different climate or management changes to the model and see how the model responds in terms of productivity or in terms of fluxes. Another thing I've been working on for the last few years is water fluxes and the water cycle in terms of precipitation, evapotranspiration from ecosystems, and stream flow draining from streams draining ecosystems. This is because the carbon and the water cycles are strictly connected in every ecosystem. And also because part of the carbon from an ecosystem can leave an ecosystem as dissolved organic carbon, as as carbon dissolved in the stream. But the future of environmental monitoring is really through proximal and remote sensing, which are largely based on spectral measurements. What it means is spectral measurements basically are based on the analysis of the spectrum of the reflected light from ecosystems. And from this, from this analysis, we can come up with different vegetation indices, which are proxies of ecosystem status, or like above ground biomass, water or nitrogen content, or ecosystem stress as well. These proxies, these indices can feed into models. This is the same type of models that I showed before, light use efficiency type of model. And so this information remotely sensed that can allow us to scale up the measurements that we do at the site level to higher level, like regional level. Thank you.
Perfectly timed, Matteo. Thank you very much. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Matteo? Well, very getting quiet. Oh, no, perfect.
Seem to be the best at the stupid questions. Are all your sites in Ireland? I saw one was in Kerry there. Are they all local or?
No, they're not all local. I show a few pictures, I think, of my postdoc in Italy. One was in Kerry, another one in Kildare. Yeah, I had
How do you select them? Is there something in particular you look for?
funding. This instrumentation is pretty expensive, so I still have collaboration and going on, but you select the ecosystem, and then if you're lucky enough to get funding, you build a tower there, basically.
Brendan?
Just very briefly, in terms of the models you use, I mean, do you use sort of like differential equation type models or linear models? And if you say yes to any of those questions, you can give a seminar talk to the maths seminar series as well.
We use different types of models, empirical process-based models, but no, I'm not going to talk about the models in the seminar.
That's super. Thank you so much, Matteo.
Thank you.